Welcome to the Page Turnerz podcast, where book lovers unite to celebrate the enchanting world of fiction. With your host, Paul A. Brooks. In each episode, we'll dive into the captivating realms of storytelling, exploring the pages that transport us to magical places and introduce us to unforgettable characters. In each episode, we'll embark on a creative expedition through the minds of seasoned and emerging writers to unravel the mysteries and unveil the passion that fuels their stories. Join us on this odyssey through the pages and pixels of imagination, where words become worlds and stories illuminate our lives. So, pour yourself a coffee and immerse yourself in discussions about writing, gripping plots, heroes and villains, and the sheer joy of escaping into a well-crafted story.
On today's show, I had the pleasure of speaking to Shreya Gupta, a senior book cover designer at Macmillan. Now, we talked about her background, her move from India to the United States, and how she managed to land a job with one of the 5 big publishing houses. Her talent and passion for illustration and cover design were obvious, which is why, along with working for Macmillan, she's worked for Google, Penguin Random House, Fast Company and Vox, among many others. Now, as authors, we know our cover designs are our strongest marketing tool, and when we talked about how she designs them, I had a real aha moment. This is award-winning illustrator and cover designer Shreya Gupta. Hi Shreya, and welcome to the podcast. Listen, thank you so much for coming. I've been really looking forward to meeting you and talking to you about cover design. So welcome to the show.
Thank you, Paul. I'm very excited to be here.
Yeah, it's great. And really, honestly, it's because we were just talking off camera just a moment ago, how important covers are. And your book cover has to be exactly right because it's your first and only go at creating a first impression. And it's the thing that that spurs people to pick your book up off the shelf. So this is going to be great. I'm really looking forward to talking to you. And I'd like to just kind of go over some of the things that you've done. So you are an award-winning illustrator, School of Arts Visual University guest speaker, and a senior designer for Macmillan, one of the big 5. Wow. So that's fantastic. So I know I'm speaking to the right person, which is absolutely great. So let me ask you then, I want to talk to you a little bit about your background before we start talking about cover design. Have you always been an illustrator and a designer?
It didn't start that way. So I grew up in India, and as a kid, I loved taking photographs. And as a kid, I wasn't allowed to take around a camera. So I started drawing and to remember things. And that was my introduction to art. Once I grew up, my parents encouraged me to go down the safe path of becoming an engineer, especially because I did well academically.
Right.
I was working at a major IT company, Infosys, in India for 3 years when I realized that I need to do something creative. I was pretty good at my job, but I think I was very bored also.
Well, I suppose there is an element of art in IT engineers, particularly when you're problem solving and things like that. You have to have some kind of creative ability to fix issues in the first place. So, there might be a bit of a strange one, admittedly, but there's a little bit of a crossover, which is great. So, I mean, drawing and painting and that sort of thing is always seemingly a passion from when you're a child. I mean, I know you just talked about taking photos and things like that, but as a youngster, as a girl growing up, were you always interested in drawing and painting? And were you one of those annoying children who were just very good at it?
Well, I was always one of the good ones in my class.
Yeah.
And my friends would often ask me to do their art assignments for them. So, I guess I might be one of those annoying kids. Yeah, I always kept drawing, even though I was working in IT, like my own personal work. And when I realized that this is maybe not what I want to do, and I agree, like there is some element of creativity, but I think the work that I was doing was eventually getting too easy for me.
Mm-hmm.
And there is no challenge to solve when everything starts to look easy. at least for me, I start to get bored.
Yeah,
And to keep things interesting, I need to have some kind of challenge.
yeah,
Um,
absolutely. Yeah.
so then I decided that I need to maybe try something else. And I looked up what would be similar to drawing, and I found illustration courses. And it seemed like the best schools were in the United States, so that's where I applied. And luckily, I was accepted in School of Visual Arts, Masters of Fine Arts program for illustration.
That's heck of a change, isn't it? From India to you're in New York, aren't you? Is that where you kind of landed, so to speak, straight to
Yeah.
New York? Wow, that's quite a change. Did you come over on your own?
Yes, I do
Wow.
some distant relatives here, but yeah, my family's in India and I'm here now.
Wow, that's amazing. I mean, that takes real courage and conviction in what you really want to do to make I mean, that's thousands of miles. That's fantastic. So, other than the wanting to do a course, so to speak, in the visual arts, did you have any influences in terms of your artwork? Was there anybody that you aspired to be like? Now, I know, you know, as a writer and as when I speak to other authors, we're always trying to, admittedly wrongly, trying to compare ourselves to the bigger writers, you know, Stephen King's, J.K. Rowling, those kind of people, really, which is not the right thing to do, of course, because we're all individual, we've got our own voice. But as an artist, for illustration, did you have any influences yourself?
Yes, and I think what you just mentioned before is how anyone would get interested in a field because someone else's work inspired you
Hmm.
and to a degree where you want to do it. And when I was in India and I felt like I need to make a change, I I came across illustration, but then I was very clueless about what this illustration field meant and how people who were involved in the field made a living. So this is a little funny. I actually went on Google and I searched best illustrators in the world. I thought maybe if I can find the best illustrators, I would figure out how they are making a living.
Yeah.
And I came across the work of Yuko Shimizu, who is a Japanese illustrator based in New York. And I was blown away by her work. It's the concepts and the execution is amazing. And I remember spending like 2 hours the first time I saw her work. So I think that was my uh, initial, like you mentioned, Stephen King and J.K. Rowling being an aspiration for a lot of like writing to that level. I think that Yoko Shimizu's work was for me.
Hmm.
And from there, then I found out more about what illustration is about. And then that is how I got interested in the field and started working towards it.
Wow. So how did you then become a cover designer then from being an illustrator to into working within the cover design industry and Macmillan? How did you go about doing that?
Yes. So after I graduated, I was meeting some art directors. We had um, uh, at my school, we would have guest speakers come in, and some of them would be art directors. So once I graduated, I reached out to them, and I reached out to some others who I really wanted to work with. One of them was Rodrigo Corral. He is the creative director of FSG, which is an imprint at Macmillan. So I showed him my work, and while we were talking, he mentioned that he sometimes he has his own studio, which he mentioned while he was reviewing his work, and
Mhm.
sometimes would hire interns. So we started talking about that, and I ended up working for him at his studio. And one of his projects were book cover design. And that was my first time illustrating and designing a cover. And I loved working with typography and I really enjoyed the process. So that is how I was introduced to book cover design. And after that, I started applying for jobs. And my first job was at Hachette Book Group as a designer.
That's amazing. Again, that's testament to your bravery then, really, isn't it? Because, it's actually a very entrepreneurial spirit as well, isn't it? A lot of people are almost afraid to ask for things. In my background in online marketing, if you don't ask, you don't get. I mean, it's as simple as that. And it does take that nugget of bravery just to
Mhm.
reach out and say, look at this. This is me. Look what I can do. I can help you. That's absolutely wonderful. It's a great thing to do. So, it's really nice to speak to somebody else who's not afraid to ask. And that's the thing. I say to everybody, if you don't ask, you don't get. What's the worst that can happen? They just say no. Fair
Yes.
enough. And then you just move on. But that's absolutely fantastic. So let's talk about cover design then. So, I mean, really, your cover is, I suppose, one of your, if not the strongest marketing tool, isn't it, as an author? Particularly if you're an indie author, you pretty much have to do all the marketing and everything else yourself. So if you've got a great book cover, that
Mhm.
is, immediately something that draws an audience. And it also helps to attract the right audience as well, depending on the genre, I would say. And also, I think that if you've got a really good cover design, that it helps your author brand. It allows you to establish yourself, establish a brand as an author. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely.
I don't think you can go far wrong as long as you've got a really good cover. So let's talk about those. So um, what I'd like to do really, because I know you've got some covers that we're going to talk about and talk through and all that sort of thing, and I can't wait to see those. So that's going to be great. But essentially, uh, am I correct in saying that really a cover has three elements? You've got your front, and you've got the spine, and then the back. All three elements of those can have part of the artwork on them. And so I suppose that it's trying to make the best of that space without making it look cluttered and too busy. That's the kind of thing that is in my head when I'm looking for a cover. I'm looking for something that is um, easily recognizable, that tells the story without almost tells the story without me opening the book. So, um, what in your experience, let's take the front cover first of all. What should be on the front cover of a book? What elements should be there?
Well, like you said, a cover is a visual introduction to the book, and that is the first contact for the reader. So, what should be on the cover is what represents the book in an intriguing, unique way, but also true to it. Um, and it could be typography, it could be the visuals, it could be the combination of both,
Mhm.
or it could be one of those elements combined together. And it should tell a story.
So,
So,
do you so if you let's take the visual side of it first of all, the image that goes on there. Do you when you're designing a cover image, do you use a stock image to start with, or do you design something completely from scratch, so totally bespoke, or do you do sort of a combination of all of them?
I like designing covers which are dictated by the book itself.
Okay.
Um, for example, my cover process starts when I receive a brief and a manuscript, and the brief would generally have obviously the copy that goes on the cover. In very rare cases, it's just a visual,
Hmm.
but rare. And I will also receive what's the body of this bookshelf, and by that I mean where this book sits in the market, like what are the other books of this in this genre,
Yeah.
or who are going to be the readers of this book. Um, and then I will also sometimes receive some guiding images, either from the editor or from the author or from both, because they have some expectations and they're hoping to see cover a certain way. So I take all of those parameters into consideration when I'm working on a book. And then I will also read the manuscript. If it's fiction, I will research the characters, what time period they are based in, how they're dressed. If it's nonfiction, I will research that topic. So a lot of research goes into it when starting a cover.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Actually, it kind of goes on from what you were saying earlier on, actually, about you. What I did, and I think you kind of touched on it yourself, is I opened the top 10 book covers in the genre, in the sci-fi genre that I write for, and have a look to see if there are any common traits that each of those and common elements that each of those books have, and then kind of almost. I mean, my designer did it obviously, but I had an idea of what I think should have been on the cover, and of course included that in my brief as well. So that's really interesting. And so you've done something similar, or you do something similar?
So when I look at other covers, that is mostly to set boundaries in a way, like
Mhm.
what to do and what not to do. Um, Sometimes when you're looking at buyer's bookshelf, it the cover that I'm designing may not be right for what I'm already seeing out there. So sometimes it can be completely different, but sometimes it makes sense to have some of those elements on my cover, but maybe design them in a way that looks a little unique and unexpected. Um, Personally, I try to do my covers a little like set them apart from what's out there,
Mhm.
because I want readers to look at it and wonder, oh, this looks a little different. What's in it? So I want to intrigue them and make them pick the book.
Yeah, see, there's that bravery coming out again. Not afraid to do something different. But that's great. But I think you're absolutely right, because that kind of makes your book cover stand out, doesn't it, from all of the others? That particular element that allows it to jump off the page, which is really important, because when people are perusing the shelves to pick up a book, it's the one that stands out the most. That's the one that they always pick up first. So again, that's really good. I'm amazed by that. So do you start with um, the image, or do you start with the typography and the typeface and the font and all of that sort of stuff? Where do you start?
I usually start with image research if it's to have a visual, unless it's not a all type cover. And generally, I let the first I will do a lot of research, and then I'll see how that fits on the cover, what elements need to be there, and then I'll go for a type research. I
Mhm.
will look at different typography. I will also look at handwritten type, and then I will see how those two are coming together, and that what results in a cover. Maybe I can show and talk about one of the covers.
Yeah, let's do it. Yeah, absolutely.
So this book,
Oh,
Lies
lovely.
by Maria Dawn, this was her debut book. And the story is about the protagonist who is mentally ill. She is hallucinating, pretty much having a breakdown. And she somehow gets caught in a murder mystery. And the story is very visual, which was very exciting for me as a designer,
Mm.
because it gives me so many visuals to work with. I had presented a lot of options for this one. This one I illustrated myself, and then I also used stock imagery and also combination of stock images and illustration together. I tried um, including the main elements from the book. So she sees some postcards. The incident takes place on a bridge, and there's personal connection with her parents, which is also having some importance in the story. So her face is very fragmented to show, like, she's going through something drastic, and
Mhm.
it's those elements and bringing them all together. The author was very appreciative of the fact that I included so many elements, but the image itself is so simple and graphic.
Mhm.
Once I had this image, then I worked with the space. I knew that I wanted this in the center of the book and the first thing you see on the cover. And then I worked with different types. I used typefaces, but in the end, handwritten type with some roughness to it seemed to work best with the image.
Yeah, yeah. It kind of feels like there's that bit of sort of murder mystery going on there with that particular type that you've got on there. So was that was very much a conscious choice then. What I really like
Mhm.
is the contrast that you've got on there and how much the image and the text stands out from that. Do you find when you look at a lot of books that sometimes the text or the image is lost? Maybe it's too busy.
That can happen when you're not establishing a visual hierarchy.
Hmm.
So visual hierarchy is when you are visually, so when I picked this book, the first thing you see is the face
Yeah,
and you look at the type. And even in the face, the first you see is the whole face, then you start to notice the elements,
yeah.
the hierarchy in which you're looking at this cover.
Ah.
And sometimes when you're not taking into consideration the visual hierarchy, that's when the image starts to look very busy and confusing.
Wow, I didn't know that. That's absolutely amazing. So in terms of the hierarchy then, how do you decide what goes where and when, presumably then? So I imagine on the book cover that you just had, the complete face would have come first, and then you would have added in the other elements at that point. Um, so how did you, because you were absolutely right. When you picked up that book, the first thing I saw was the face.
Right.
And then, as you said, my eye started to move around to identify the other elements that were on the page on the cover as well. How did you create that? How did you get how did you get me to do that?
Our the way we see things pretty much work the same for everyone. And the way to do it is either by size. So the face does take most of the space on the
Yeah,
cover.
yeah,
Also, contrast, the pink against the black really stands out. So contrast, size, color, all of that dictates visual hierarchy. And as a designer, I have been practicing that for a long time. So you
yeah.
can do that through your practice and experience. Um, yeah. So that's how you do it.
That's amazing. Can we have a look at the spine on that one? Because that's the front cover. On the spine, see, what's really interesting and something that my designer asked me about was how many pages are in the book?
Mhm.
So when I said it's going to be about 600 pages, because I write these whopping great things, um, that thickness, I suppose, does that allow you as a designer to add more elements into the spine?
It can definitely. At the start for this spine, I had just the eye, but the author really wanted to show the face. And once I included the face, it kind of works. Like you're not really able to see the tiny elements that much, but you
Mm,
do see the face, and um, you know it's about this person that's on the spine. The story is about this person. So the spine is because when you see a bookshelf, you're mostly looking at the spine. So
yeah,
um, the spine is a good place to add either some part of the cover, or sometimes the spine is completely different. I was just taking a look if I have an example. Unfortunately, not, but
that's right.
um, sometimes you can add additional elements in the spine to add to the storytelling of the cover.
Okay, so what, look, a different image to the one that's on the front?
Yes, sometimes.
Wow. Okay. Yeah, that's so again, I suppose that's absolutely true, isn't it? If the book is are stacked like this, so the spine's facing, it's really important that that spine stands out. And again, what I really liked is the contrast that you've got there between the really dark background and then the stark font that pops out from you, which is lovely. It's really nice to see. And sometimes I think, that kind of idea gets lost, but it's also it seems to me, looking at what you've done there, it seems very simple in as much that it's not cluttered and it's easy to read. Do you find that, and some of the books I've looked at, and particularly on the back cover now, the blurb that's written on there, if the
Mhm.
font for that isn't right, it's really hard to read. And of course, as a reader, the first thing I'll look at is the cover, then I'll pick it up, and then I'll want to know more about the book, and then I'll turn it over and read the blurb. And if I can't read it, the first thing that happens is it goes back on the shelf. So how do you decide the font that goes on the back?
Well, in most cases, I will like to use a similar font to what's on the cover.
Hmm.
And everything is handwritten, but what you see is that there are no serifs like in the handwritten. So what I used for the blurb is a sans serif font.
Right.
So I personally like the type on the content, the copy to be very legible because like you said, if you can't read it, you're not going to put in the effort to try to read it.
That's true.
It's white, it's plain white, nothing fancy going on here. So the information is there.
Yeah. But I think that's the case in point again, isn't it? It's that simplicity behind it, so that it does allow you to read exactly what's going on. So are there sort of recommended types of fonts, I should say, for specific genres? I'm thinking, looking at the font that you've got on the front of that book, that is a very particular font that almost is almost a visual in itself in telling me as the reader what that book is, what I'm likely to expect in the book, should we say. That's probably more to the point. So are there fonts that you would recommend for, say, sci-fi?
So I would like to add first that I wrote this. It's
Oh,
not
okay. Wow.
front cover is handwritten by me.
Wow. Okay.
I wouldn't say that there are specific fonts for specific genres. For example, this book here, it's really warm fiction, a warm story about this woman who is trying to start her own museum and she wants
Hmm.
to curate it. Now, the font used here, I used it because I wanted this book, the cover, to have a little bit of a vintage element to it. Now this vintage element can also be used, sorry, vintage type can also be used for a historical book, but this is fiction. So how a type is used also the also can make an impact on how the cover, the tone of the cover is perceived.
Mm.
So that's why it's hard for me to suggest a certain typeface for a sci-fi
Yeah,
because
yeah. It's really interesting though, because when you picked that up, my emotion to that book was completely different. My reaction and the emotional behind that was completely different to that book as opposed to the other one. And that I think really not only was the color obviously softer and different, but that typeface itself, that font, sort of is almost relaxing to look at. It's less scratchy, so to speak. So I'm just wondering whether or not sci-fi to me suggests technology. It suggests the future advancement. So I can imagine that the typeface of the fonts will be very angular, very squared, very I don't know what I'm looking for, but different to like an ordinary serif font or something like that. Is it true then that there would be the right or better fonts used depending on the genre that I mean, looking at those two very different genres, those fonts are very different.
I think what you just mentioned would be a good start, but you would also be looking at the story, the tone of the story. It could be,
Yeah.
but it could be a romance sci-fi, or it could be an alien invasion sci-fi.
Mm.
So you would want the visuals and the type to be adhering to that tone of the story. So those angular types, yes, you can start with that, but I would also encourage you to experiment and see what fits the tone of the story.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And how much does color come into play when you're sort of designing covers?
Sure. So like you mentioned, this book had a very different uh,
Mm.
genre compared
Yeah,
to before. The story is very warm, and for that reason, I wanted to use warm colors because it does feel softer when you use warm colors, and so
yeah,
yeah, it's very dominant here. Um, so yes, colors are very important, and they help inform the tone of the story. Um, this other book I have here, again, very different. Red, Critting.
yeah,
It says it all on the cover.
yeah.
Red makes you feel like something immediate, something you need to take action on right away.
Yeah.
So yes, color can have a big impact on you.
Yeah.
And
Is that something that you would discuss with your client then as to the colors? I mean, in the brief, I'm assuming they will send you an idea of the types of colors that they would perhaps like you to use, or even some examples of covers in the genre that they want their cover designing in. Do you go on? Sorry. I was going to say, do you find that sometimes if someone sends you a particular color, because as I said earlier, as a writer, I have an idea of what my cover should look like, and you kind of touched on it earlier on when you were talking about reading through the manuscript, getting ideas of the characters, how they're dressed, which is going to give you a period to work from, and all that sort of stuff. Do you find then that sometimes the color that the author wants is perhaps not quite right for how you see it? How do you see it differently to the writer?
I like to be respectful of all of my collaborators, so I always take their thoughts into consideration.
Yeah.
If an author tells me they really love a cover, I will ask them what do they like about their cover. Is it the visuals? Is it the type? Is it the image itself? Obviously, the author knows we cannot copy a cover,
Hmm.
so try to work with what they like about it.
Yeah.
Then that will help inform my decision into designing the cover.
So do you read the entire manuscript? Because sometimes, I mean, for example, the person who designed my covers, he didn't need to read the entire manuscript. I gave him, I suppose, an overview of the story, which kind of gave him the flavor, the tone, really,
Yeah.
if you like, which you talked about, for the kind of image that I wanted. But do you find it important to read the entire manuscript?
I don't think it's absolutely necessary. For Library Motif, I did read the whole story because I found it very interesting.
Mm.
Um, but a lot of times there is a limitation of time. I design 10 covers a season at my present job,
Yeah.
and a season spans for 4 months. So 10 covers in 4 months is a lot. So
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
start to read as much as I can, but I generally read as much enough to get the tone of the story and to find out what the important elements are. It's always helpful to get that information also from the author and the editor, and then I can take that into consideration while I'm coming up with my own ideas. I think what I mostly focus on how I can design the cover so it looks a little different from what's
Mhm.
out and
Yeah.
still adhering to the genre.
Yeah. So I was going to ask about genres, really. So, do you get to choose which covers you design in which particular genre, or are you just given a brief and say, right, there you go, Shreya, that's what I want you to do? Does it work that way?
At my present job, we can tell our manager what we are interested in, and then he has to like consider the whole teams, and maybe there's a favorite one for everyone. So it's really we can tell them tell I can tell my creative director, but it's really up to him what he decides to assign it to me.
Hmm.
And then with my clients, my freelance clients, they usually will look at my portfolio and they'll see what I have worked on in the past, and maybe they will give me something in the similar topic. Like at Hachette, I designed a book on spirituality, um, which is called Spiritual Anatomy. It's a it's written by Kamlesh Patel. And very recently, HarperCollins reached out to me to design a cover, which is still in progress, but it's completely different. It looks completely different from this one, but they reached out to me because they saw I have already done the book.
Yeah.
On
So, how much in collaboration do you go through, and how much contact do you go through with the authors as you're going through the design process? Do you ask them to sign off on, say, the font or the color or the illustration? How do you work with your clients?
Sure. So generally, I work with my editor, and the editor is the one who is in conversation with the author.
Hmm.
In rare cases, I have worked with an author directly, this book, First Things First, by Nadira Simons. It's about hip hop, women in hip hop who made an impact. And in this case, the author had a specific vision for the book. So she shared that with me. She wanted to have portraits, but also in their recognizable wardrobes. So she shared photographs with us, and based on that, I hired an illustrator and we worked together. Um, in this case, the author did have feedback on, for example, she wanted the skin tones to be represented right for the
Mhm.
women. And then for the type, she really left it up to me. I referenced hip hop graphics and posters from that time period, which informed this type design. And this again is hand drawn. You can take a closer look.
Yes, lovely.
Um, so when I'm working with authors or my editors or any client, I always give them 4 to 5 options to select from, different directions, different type designs, different visuals. That helps establish which direction we want to proceed in.
Right.
And I get the feedback, sometimes author will like a type, but not the visual. Sometimes it's the other way around. Sometimes they like both of them and maybe just change the color, or sometimes they don't like anything.
Yeah.
So I always encourage all the people involved to trust the process and trust the collaborators. And when you don't like anything, you can just let them know that this is not what you were hoping for. Or if you just want to change something, let them know that. And it's usually up to the designers to figure out the answers for you. So you're not doing that hard work. You're letting the designer do that work for you.
Right.
And my process is to come up with another set of revisions. And even when someone tells me like, hey, I don't like this color, maybe this will look better in blue, I will try blue, but then I will also try green, blue, yellow, like other colors, just for them to see. It's easier to make decisions when you have everything laid out in front of you.
Yeah, for me, it's a very emotional journey, because that I was saying earlier on, the feelings that I had between those two books that you picked up. So there's that kind of instant impression, isn't there, that you get. It is that first impression, as I was saying earlier on. That's the most important thing. So I think to have that opportunity and that ability to present 3 or 4 different options to then get a direction to go down, I think that's a great thing. So do you have any specific rules that you work towards when you're designing, I suppose, including that kind of emotional element?
I think for me, one of the rules for myself is to get the tone of the book right.
Yeah, yeah.
I think that is the most important thing. Even when you're designing all type cover, I think getting the tone is extremely important. And then you bring in the visuals, because the visuals you're bringing in should help inform that tone. Now, like I mentioned, my cover diagram motif, when I presented different options, I also used photography, which is so different from illustration. But all of those comps were informing single tone of
Hmm.
serious, a little crazy person.
That's amazing. I mean, and I think that's important. I suppose one of the other things that you have to take into consideration is the audience, the demographics of the audience, I suppose, really, because if you're writing a young adult fantasy, for example, that's going to be radically different to someone who reads horror. So those sorts of things, I suppose, then do come into play when you are sort of not constructing to the rules, but adding the right rules in when you're creating that book. So are you essentially then asking questions of the author, or are you relying very much on the brief and hope that they filled it in correctly?
That's funny. Uh,
Yeah.
well, sorry. Um, I think sometimes briefs are great and I don't need to ask anything more. I have worked with editors who have given me just a general idea of the book,
Hmm.
and they have asked me to, because I have a trust relationship with them already, to just, they give me the whole control of, like, give me the creative freedom. Um, Sometimes, yes, the briefs are lacking the information that I need to get started, and in that case, I would generally call for a meeting. Sometimes just talking it out. Sometimes what someone is hoping to see does not translate to words that well, and it's just important to talk and get their expectations right. Yeah, so discussing, asking questions is very helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there is, it's a collaboration really at the end of the day, isn't it? Just to make sure that I think tone is probably the most important thing that you've said really in terms of creating that want for a reader to pick the cover off of the shelf. Is the tone of it, is it right? Is it appealing? I think that's the most important thing. So what we need to touch on then is what we talked about earlier on, is artificial intelligence and its role in design and particularly cover design. What are your thoughts on AI?
Well, I think generative AI, so as you know, I work as an illustrator also in addition to a cover designer.
Mm,
And I feel lately some of the platforms and some of the generative AI software are um, a lot of them, not all, but a lot of them are taking content and artwork of creatives without their consent or compensation and training these machines. And um, I I find that a little disheartening.
mm,
I I think sometimes the results are interesting when people are using generative AI, and because it's out there, um, people assume it's good to use it. I think in some cases they are, but when doing creative work, I feel people should be a little like give it some thought, as in what's being output. Is it really solving their brief, and is it ethical?
for me, with artificial intelligence, what I want it to do is to do the dishes and fix my car. That's what I want it to do. That kind of stuff. I would much rather it left the art for us, because as you said, it generally, I'm not sure that it ever creates anything unique. It just snatches elements and crowbars things together. And what's really interesting, actually, when I was talking to an author who uses AI, if she comes to a point where she's not quite sure where it's going and uses AI for the research, she has to fact check it. So even though it's come up with a whole list of things that should be right, a lot of them aren't. So AI is certainly not where it should be right now. So I think, for me, AI should be all about, as I say, fixing cars and doing the dishes and sort of the practical stuff that I don't want to do necessarily, and to leave the art stuff to us, which I think is absolutely vital that they do that. So, um, how can clients and people get in touch with you now at this point? Going through Macmillan, or I know you have your website. You got a contact form on your website, which I'll put the URL to in the description, by the way.
There isn't a contact form. I just have my email ID listed.
Okay.
So those are the best way to get in touch with me. I'm also on Instagram. So Instagram DM are completely fine, although emails are really the best way to get in touch with me.
Yeah, yeah. You're on Twitter as well, or X, as it's called now.
Yeah, I think I have an account there, but maybe I should remove it because I honestly never log in.
You know what? I'm the same. I mean, we do have an X stroke Twitter account, and I do upload the images for these podcasts that I do, but I don't really interact with it as much as I do on Instagram. Do you think that's because it's changed too much, or that it's lost a little bit of popularity? And essentially, because you're in a very visual medium, Instagram is better.
I think it's got to do with being very visual. I think Twitter is popular with people who are like writers, editors, and oh, sorry, X. And Instagram is more popular with artists. Yeah, so I think that's the reason I have been using Instagram. Although now I have an account on Kara also, which is I don't know if you've heard of it. After Instagram changed their terms of use, a lot of artists have migrated to Cara.
Right. Wow. No, I didn't know. Okay. That's interesting. So if you can leave me a link for that, then I can include that as well in the description so people can get in contact with you that way. So before I let you go, do you have a favorite cover that you've worked on?
I think one of my favorites is this book, Folio Society's Interpreter of Maladies by Jhumpa Lahiri.
Hmm.
And this was a dream project for me. Folio Society, you might have heard of them. They publish collector's edition book of very well-known books.
Yeah.
Was a Pulitzer Prize winning book. And for this book, on this book, there is no title. There is no
Wow.
author name on the cover. It's only on the
Only on
spine.
the spine.
And the concept, so it's a collection of 9 short stories about immigrants from India who live in the US. Some of them, like a couple of stories, are about characters living in India, but most are about immigrants. So on the slipcase, I wanted to do something special because I wanted people to keep the slipcase and not toss it out.
Yeah.
So for this project, I started with the book cover. I read the foreword and it talked about how immigrants move to a completely new place and they somehow make a living despite all of their hardships. So for this, if you open the cover, it's roots and which are going from the back cover and then the lotus blooming on the front cover.
Right.
Lotus is the national flower of India, which is why I used lotus. But then again, I wanted to do something unexpected.
Hmm.
I flipped, instead of making it go this way, which is how most people would think about it, I made it go from back to front. So that utilizes the back cover also. And I made the lotus really fiery red, like give it some energy against the dark background. And even for the roots, I used an unexpected color of light blue. The stems, like most people, would do it green.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then for the cover, I wanted to create a contrast. For the slipcase, I wanted to create a contrast with the color of the cover. So I went with orange. And on the slipcase, you see small spot illustrations, and these spot illustrations are representative of the 9 short stories. So there are 4 on one side and 5 on this side. And this book accompanies 7 illustrations, interior. Jhumpa Lahiri signed it for me, which was a big honor.
Lovely. Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
there are 7 illustrations. This is the opening illustration. So this was one of my dream projects.
I
Um,
bet. I
very
bet. Yeah, that's really lovely. I love the minimalist. Oh, it's almost minimalist, isn't it? From on the book cover itself, from the back to the front, with no writing on it at all. It's really nice. It's really evocative. It creates that curiosity to want to understand what the book's about. That's lovely. And I think those images, the small images on the cover, really sort of bring home what you were talking about before, and as much that illustration, small as it may be, it really demonstrates what the reader can expect inside the book. That's absolutely fantastic to do that. So listen, thank you so much for coming on the show today. I've learned a lot just listening to you, which is really great. So again, thank you so much for coming on the show. And illustrations wise, before I let you go, actually I want to talk to you a little bit about your illustrations. So because you did some inside the book there, actually, so is that something that you do as part and parcel of your job, or with Macmillan, or and as a freelancer you would take on commissions to do illustrations?
Yes, I do that all the time. I have also illustrated picture books.
Ah, wow. Okay.
Yes, so I do take that as part. It depends on, the budget. Like
Yeah.
if his illustration is a big ask, it takes a lot more effort to do an illustration as opposed to using stock photography or
Yeah.
an illustration. So it depends on the budget and the project. For example, when I hired the illustrator for first things first. At the start, we were only asking for the front cover, but then I suggested we do a full cover. That's better. And then we also ended up doing end paper illustrations. So I work in similar way. If the illustration is going to help the book visually, then I would do it.
That's lovely. That's really nice. So again, people can reach out to you for book covers and illustrations as well, which is lovely. So Shreya Gupta, thank you so much for coming on the show today. And hopefully I'd like to speak to you again in the future.
Yes, I would love to. Thank you so much. It was a pleasure.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you for joining us on another captivating episode of the Page Turnerz podcast. We hope you enjoyed delving into the pages with us, discovering new stories, and revisiting beloved classics. If you're as passionate about books as we are, don't forget to subscribe to our podcast and leave a review. Your feedback keeps us bringing you fascinating discussions, author interviews, and book recommendations. Remember, the adventure never ends when you have a book in hand. Until next time, keep turning those pages and let the magic of storytelling continue to inspire your imagination. Happy reading.